Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us on this third lecture of Game Production Masterclass. Today, we'll be talking and learning about how to start and manage studio. And with us is Andrej. And before that, I'll just have a small announcement. Again, this week, it was amazing how many of you send us your homeworks, and they are really detailed, and Alan is already going through them and writing comments and feedbacks, and till the end of the week he will send you back all of the answers, and I hope you will learn something from it. And again, I think that's the best way to learn, to get feedback from the mentors. And I'll again just thank all of the sponsors and partners on this project. First, this whole Game Production Masterclass is co-produced with the Center za Kreativnost, Center for Creativity, and co-financed by European Union and Republic of Slovenia. And we also have sponsors, Criterion and Outfit. And this project was also in partnership with Reveris. And before we go into our lecture, I also again share the link for the notes, which is really it's kind of populating down, and it's used very well. So this week we also have notes, and you can just scroll down and take notes with your attendees. And without further ado, I will introduce Andrej. Andrej is game director at Exordium Games, and I first heard about Exordium at the Reboot Develop, one of the biggest Croatian game development conferences, which I really like, and I hope that this year will happen again. Maybe Andrej knows something more, because he's also involved in Croatian Game Developer Association, and he also tries to build better ecosystem in Croatia. And today he'll talking about starting and managing game studios, and I think you will enjoy this talk, as he shared with me a lot of really cool insights, a lot of really cool points. So Andrej, take it away.
Thank you very much, Rok. Very happy to be here today with everybody. I got the pleasure to today present and talk about starting and managing a studio. To answer the question about Reboot Develop, it's really, I also really like the conference. It's a very boutique thing. We like it. It didn't happen for a while because of obviously kind of the situation with the pandemic. But as far as I know, a couple of days ago, they announced the domestic version in September, if I'm not mistaken. So we're looking forward, if the situation with the pandemic stays good or gets better, that we get to meet a lot of people again in September on Reboot Develop. So back to the topic, week number 3. Congratulations to everybody who has been following the content, to everybody who sent in the homeworks. It's not too late, even if you kind of start later to do the work and send in the homework. I did share a little bit pre today's lecture kind of materials that you could prep on. So just again, as a reminder for anybody who missed it, the pre-lecture preparation materials, even if you didn't have the chance to kind of read or watch through all of them, you can do it later. They're not a requirement kind of to be able to follow today's material. So it's not connected. You will be able to follow it. A little bit about me. I always like to introduce myself, because I think you should always know who is kind of talking to you, and then you can evaluate the points that are being made, not just by the points, but also by the experience behind the person. So I'm Andrej. I'm game director at Exordium Games. That's my main job, main function that I do. I've been in video games since somewhere like 2013. Started out with game jams and a little small indie projects with some friends. And then there from 2014 onward, started out professionally, first as a game designer, then a project manager, and now for a couple of years as a game director. Beside the work that I do in Exordium, I'm also a columnist in Reboot, the gaming culture magazine we have in Croatia, and I believe in Slovenia as well, and kind of in the whole region. I'm also an artistic advisor for video games at the Croatian Audiovisual Center. Happy to say that last year was the first year in Croatia that the Audiovisual Center had public grants for the development and production of video games. So I'm honored to be part of kind of choosing the projects that will get first public funding for the production of video games. I also advise a couple of projects, mostly tied with games. I'm all about video games, so I advise a couple of public projects on how to kind of better align to make sense, have alignment with the professional games industry as well. My formal education is in management and culture and project management, so it is aligned with production quite well and the audiovisual sector. And I'm currently an executive MBA candidate as well, so trying kind of to push more of my business know-how as well. What I primarily do in the company is production-based or running the company-based, although my love with games is in game design. So my big love is with game design, but it's not my first kind of, it's not where I spend most of my time. And I do understand kind of programming concepts. I do not program anymore. I used to go to some championships when I was in elementary school, but I'm currently a little bit rusty. And the little kind of image here in the corner is just to communicate about how I care about the ecosystem. I've really been involved with our association and also with a lot of public offices in pushing the change in the law and pushing kind of these public grants, and now working on a university level, educational level for game development. So I'm passionate about building an ecosystem, an environment in which we, but also future kind of new kids on the block, maybe you guys as well, can have a better pathway, a better kind of stepping stones, how to get into the industry, but also be more successful inside of the industry. From the things where I worked at, so before video games, I worked on television for about 10 years as a sound technician, mostly in the tech department. I worked on all possible reality TV shows that you had in Croatia, so from like Babysitters to Big Brother to Wife Swap, so a lot of that yellow type of television. And then I escaped after 10 years into video games. And in video games, we did different stuff. So from game jams, which I love, to kind of educational games, web games, more core games, now hyper casual games, also exploring blockchain games. So different genres, different platforms. And some of our biggest successes have been Bear With Me, which is kind of a point and click series where we had about 500,000 players, and Pottery, which was a hyper casual hit we published with Voodoo, which had something about 20 million install base. So that's a little bit about me, but enough about me. You're not here to listen about me, but to cover our learning objectives. And our learning objectives this week in this lecture is to learn how to create your game studio, build a team that will have the same mindset, vision, and motivation, as well as how to prepare your pitch in front of publishers, investors, and other potential stakeholders. So let's dive in. What I wanted to make you a little bit aware about is to think a little bit about how games are made, or who makes games, or in which environment games are made. And this little illustration is trying to show that kind of games are always made by people. Oh, there's examples where you can make games with computers or software, but then again, that software was made by people. So games are always kind of made by people, and people so people would be a bigger topic than games. And then those people always work in some kind of organizations. The exception here would be if you're truly a solo dev, like doing everything on your own. But as soon as you have two people or more, there's always some sort of organization between them, how they organize, how they communicate, what culture do they have. So that gets more complicated the more people you have. And organizations, then, either as indie studios, companies, or just teams, they always exist in an environment. And the environment can be different things, like which country you work in, which type of organization, who the publishers are, who the platforms are, what are the audiences, who are the customers. So it's all a lot of different factors outside of the organization or the people that compromise the environment. And then there's different ends of the spectrum on all of those topics. For instance, games can be really, really small or really, really big. You can have one person working on a game for a year or two, or you can have dozens or hundreds or thousands of people working on one game for longer than 5, 6, 7 years, so a long time. And then people can be, so games can be small or big, and people can be few or many. And then organizations are also different. So there's different aspects of how the people come together, how they look at what they're doing, how they organize, what's the process, what's the communication, the culture. And environments then are also complex. So environments are always changing, especially in the video game industry. We used to joke with people in other industries talking about how often we have changes in our environments. Like you have new platforms coming up, you have new genres being popular, you have new business models coming up, you have new audiences. So there's a constant change in the environment, and that's why it's complex with many factors that are dynamic. So there's a lot of things to think about if we talk about an alignment of a company or a studio. Like, do you think about the game? Do you think about the people? Do you think about the culture? Do you think about the audience? Like, where's the starting point, and how do you kind of align all of this to make a good vision, a good pathway to set up the stepping stones for success, whatever that success for you means. So I just wanted to have this kind of one slide where you get a little bit to think about the different approaches that can be done when we talk about producing video games, and there are really various variables in those games, people, organizations, and the environment. Another thing to think about is how you want to start out. Like, do you want to, when you think about starting a game studio, are you starting from a game, are you starting from a team, or are you starting from a company? And what is the difference here? So if we start from a game, we might start from something that is very personal, where we feel like this needs to be made. Because, for instance, I know a lot of people who started making games because they wanted to create something that they couldn't find to play, or they wanted to emulate an experience they had when they were, young players. So something left a really strong impression on them, so they wanted to recreate that impression for other players. They had a really strong vision of what they want to create. And it's possible to start out from a game. I would say that here we have to be careful and just be kind of mindful of whether then in that case you're driven by your ego. Are you driven, by not having a lot of experience, so you're kind of a little bit maybe romantic about the possible future of it, or is your game kind of a market fit where you think, oh yeah, I'm making this for an audience. You're not making this for yourself or your friends or your team, but you're making it for somebody else. So here there is a risk where sometimes when people start out from a game, they don't think about what's going to happen after the game. So they only think about, we need to produce this game, and they don't think about what after, when it's published, when it's released. And that's a little bit of a risk involved, but we'll see that different approaches have different risks. So it's not one way is the best, but it's just different approaches that people have. And some examples from starting out from a game might be Inscription, which has really had tremendous reception and very good reviews, and it's made by Daniel Mullins, who started out making it, and it's not the first example where he did this type of process starting from a game. He started making it on a game jam. So he was at a game jam, there was a theme, he participated, he had an idea, he made a game, and that game received very good scores from the community that tested it, which he saw as a market fit or traction, or people were interested. The game stood out, so he continued building it into a full game. This was like a solo approach, focused on a game and then pushing out that one game that found its interest. Another approach might be to start from a team, where you think in a way like you have a couple of friends maybe that you went to game jams with, or you have a couple of colleagues who you went to college with, or you were friends pre-college and then pre-university, then you have different skill sets coming out of university, so you come together to do games. So the first motivation here is kind of the team. You want to stay together, you want to be creative together, and you want to kind of create things together. So great teams from experience can really make great games if there's a good dynamic in the organization of that team. But you should also be aware that kind of life is complicated. We get older, people get married, people get kids, they move, they kind of change their focus. So starting out from one team and making it be the goal of kind of the team staying together can also be a risk, because a change then in that team can bring changes in dynamics to that organization if it was from the get-go being built on a team. An example here, Vlaambert was still is a really known indie studio from the Netherlands, made out of two people, Rami Ismail and JW. And this was one of the titles where they worked together on it. So Vlaambert worked on Nuclear Throne. Again, you can see really good reception, a lot of very positive reviews. But then later you see JW kind of doing projects on his own as well, or with other people. So he did a project without his other part of Vlaambert, with some other people, where it was interesting. Where if you look at it from the perspective of Vlaambert, it might be that the founders, kind of the two guys, are going into different directions, doing different things. So basing the production on a team might have changes in dynamic over time. So the team might not stay fixed. And the third approach, which happens, is to kind of form it around a company, or around the idea what value can we bring. And when I talk about value, I mean it in a couple of different senses. So value can be towards the team. So which values, which culture do we have as an organization? But it can also be values towards the consumers, like which type of products you want to build, or which type of business model you want to have. So value can come in different aspects of all of the game, team, organization, and environments that you can kind of come forward with. And here companies will usually have a little bit of a different approach. You will try to look for a market opportunity, for some competitive value, to build your track record in a certain kind of aspect of games that you want to build a certain culture internally. So here the foresight is a little bit different. You will think about how will the company survive. And this doesn't mean that it's not also about the games and the team, because that includes the team and the game. So thinking about what will be the next steps for the company might be a little bit of a more long-term approach than starting from a single product or starting from a team that you're attached to. And an example here that you can see, and also I have to be frank, it's really easy to use very successful examples, or it's easy to say, oh yeah, it really makes sense in that example. There aren't a lot of examples where you can see this constant kind of value being having an evolution in a company. Oftentimes you can see companies pivoting, changing how they approach games, changing which games they do. Even very big and successful companies, there's examples of their pivoting. If you want to find more examples, you can search on YouTube for a game studio and then evolution. So if you look at like Santa Monica Evolution, then you'll see their history of games and how they changed their approach and what they do. But the example that I wanted to show today is from that game company, where you can look over this big time period that they were active, starting out with maybe just one person or a couple guys, over to being a big team and having a lot. Sky had, if I'm not mistaken, 160 million users. So a big product with a big audience. But you could see that that game company always had kind of from Flow, the first prototype, the same vision, where they said they want to be dedicated to creating timeless interactive entertainment that inspires human connection. So the human connection is the thing that inspired them, like when they started out, and it's still something that inspires them in their current work and in their future work. So they set up like a long-term vision. They set up values. They set up something that they want to aim for long-term. And since not a lot of companies in the meantime have made this as their kind of value proposal, that game company is still one of the few ones who focuses on kind of human connection. And you can see it throughout all of their games, throughout all the years that they've been active. Another example might be Clay Entertainment, where they started out saying that they wanted to build it with the theory that game studios can make popular, interesting games with a reasonable budget on normal hours at a fair price and still be successful. So there's an interesting documentary on Clay on YouTube, I think, available as well, where they talk about how they got kids. So it was at a point in the studio's history and was really important for them to have a studio culture where you're free to kind of take the free time to spend with your family, with your kids, with your wife, with your husband. They wanted a very good work-life balance. They never wanted to compromise the work-life balance, like we often hear crunch times or some bad cultural examples maybe more from the United States than here in Europe. But Clay is an example where it was, for them, it was crucial to build it inside of the culture of the company, that the work-life balance was important to kind of make good games. And for them, it showed out, it showed to be pretty good and pretty successful. So they had a streak here, just 3 games, but they've had a streak of like 10 games, which were very successful and very popular with very positive reviews. So this is another example of starting out more from a culture or from a company perspective than a game or a team. So what would be some, if we talk about now the differences on the spectrum, like if we talk, let's have on one spectrum, we have an complete indie solo developer or just a couple of guys. And then on the other end, we have a company that is incorporated. It has a structure. It has some more admin to do. What are some main differences? And here again, I don't want to push this on you as something being better. I want to just kind of emphasize that there are differences, and it's okay for different people to choose or prefer different things. So there are successful examples in both categories. So you shouldn't kind of be, you shouldn't receive it from me that I'm rooting for some of these examples. It's more like to give you an overview where you can decide for yourself, like where you see yourself better. So when we talk about individuals, it's going to be more, if it's not their dedicated job yet, it's going to be working in free time. I remember 10 years ago when I started working on games for the first time, it was like I had a day job on television. And then after the day job, some days when you still had enough energy and motivation, then you would work like on your game up until late in the night. So this type of work might be more sporadic and more ephemeric. You're not doing it consistently every day for such and such hours, but when you have the time or when you have the drive after maybe some other obligations you have. IP rights are not agreed on a lot of times. So a lot of people who start out small teams, they never kind of solve those bureaucratic things, because if we're friends, we're not going to have the first conversation being about, yeah, but who's going to be the owner of the rights, or how much belongs to you and how much belongs to me. You're just kind of, you're excited to be working on the project together. The project is driving you. So you might pick up some of unsolved questions in terms of IP rights and commercial rights, and we'll come to those legal questions later in the presentation. But it's just something that is more often seen with small teams who aren't incorporated than with corporations. So there's another thing that is pretty important when we talk about agreements with publishers, investors, and so on, and that's that individuals carry liability. So the difference between an individual and an LLC is a limited liability company. So let's say that you get a state grant from, I don't know, any country, or from a publisher, you get some funding. And if you're just an individual and not a company, then you, with all your personal belongings, kind of are responsible against those obligations that you took on. While in the case of an LLC or a corporation, it's the company who took on the obligations, and they only carry the obligation with what they are with what they own. So it's different. The company, so nobody is planning not to fill out on their obligations, but sometimes life happens, and you have to be aware of the difference that if you're not incorporated, then as an individual you carry that obligation or that potential liability personally, while in a company it's the company who carries the liability and not you personally. So the risk that we see with individuals might be a recipe for conflicts and lawsuits if IP rights are not settled, commercial rights are not settled or agreed on, and you carry personal liability. So there's just more risk in that department of conflicts and potential lawsuits. Also, a lot of times people don't keep track as individuals on all the work and costs and everything that was invested pre-incorporation. So who did how much work? How do we value that amount of work, like from a programmer or from an artist or from a game designer or from a producer? Do we value it all the same? Do we not? So if somebody gave their own money to go to a conference or to do some roll-ups or to pitch something, is that all being tracked so that at one point you can kind of sit down together and say, okay, so how are we going to agree on our IP rights, the commercial rights, who invested more of what? So when a lot of times we can see with individuals that these questions are not solved, and it doesn't mean that they will lead to conflict. Maybe the group is really working well together, but it is a potential for conflict. So as I mentioned, all the things about the individuals, mostly The examples with the corporations is on the other end. So you have limited liability with what the company owns. Work is being done inside of a legal frame, and we'll get to the legal frame with more details. But right now, that would mean that everything that you do inside of the company has a legal frame. You have agreements with everything. All the commercial rights, IP rights are agreed on. So there is no kind of area of potentially legal questions or gray area. IP rights are agreed on. Commercial rights are agreed on. The company can sign agreements with third parties. So the company is able to trade and negotiate about the IP rights, the commercial rights, because everything is agreed upon at the level of the company. So you don't have to talk to the whole team every time that you want to talk about or negotiate with publishers, vendors, investors, and so on, because all of that is kind of agreed upon, and there's given obligation and given the right to negotiate to the company or to a person in the company. And here the question becomes, well, then if we have all those legal questions and IP questions and questions of talking with third parties, who will work on all these tasks? Like, who will be the one running this? And this is the question of, will you be the one starting and managing a studio? I know most of the people that I knew, they started out as a team, and then somebody from the team grew into the position of kind of managing those things as well. Maybe they had an affinity. Maybe they were the best at it compared to the other guys in the team. Maybe they weren't contributing enough to the other aspects of game development, so they were tasked with this thing. So there are different examples of how people do it. Rarely, I rarely saw examples where somebody was, yes, I want to start a game company. So usually it was based on a game or a team first, and then the question of a company came later. I haven't yet met somebody who was first, I want to build a game company, and then kind of thought about the team and the project and so on. But that's just my experience. So if we talk about how to manage a game studio, here it is on the left. The illustration wants to kind of share with you the functions of management. So what management, if we can sum it down to just one picture, then it would be 4 functions that management or managers do, and that's planning and decision making, organizing, leading, and controlling. And I think most of you have an intuitive understanding for what planning is. Planning is kind of looking ahead and how are we going to solve something? How are we going to do something? What's the plan? By when? By which budget? Who is going to be working on that? Then another thing is, which is really important, is organizing, which means how will you coordinate all the people, all the activities, all the resources. So people, buildings, software, money, deadlines, processes, who will be doing what, at which time, in which manner, by what date, for how much budget. So organizing means we have a plan, we have a vision, but now somebody needs to kind of be on the level of organizing all of it and making sure that everybody knows what they have to do at what time, in which manner, to kind of get the goals or the milestones of the plan. And that's leading also comes in, but leading is a little bit different from organizing. Leading is kind of motivating people and reminding them of what the goals are, reminding them of like why they're in it, because things can go wrong. People can forget about milestones. People can go over time. People can go over quality. You know, life happens. It's not that somebody is on purpose doing something wrong, but they're just situations which are complicated or should be talked about. And then it's really important that the person who is managing is also not just micromanaging, but is leading in a way that they can give examples of how to solve something, how to sit with people and think of solutions, how to remove things that are blocking the people in the team from getting to their goals. So it's about making sure that everybody is on track with their motivation, with the goal, with how we're doing something, but also giving support when it doesn't happen. And that's the aspect of controlling, where my experience in Croatia, maybe it's different with kind of the region and the countries, that people have a bad attitude towards control because we have bad experiences and examples. Our examples in Croatia with control usually means that somebody is coming unannounced to ask you everything that you should know, and if you don't know it, then you're getting some kind of negative feedback loop, which controlling should not be. So controlling, the purpose is not to scare you and jump scare you and like, do you know what we need to do tomorrow, and have you done this and have you done this? But the purpose of control is for it to be announced so that you know when the control is going to be, and you know what is going to be asked on the control. And it's mostly tied to the things that are in the plan already. So it's just a mechanism of checking whether we're still on track, whether the plan that we made still makes sense or we need to make changes. So control is not about controlling the people, it's about controlling whether we're on track with the plan, or do we have to do some leading and some changing and change our plans to adapt to the new situation. So that's kind of the shortest that I can explain what management is in all of its functions, the 4 managerial functions. And now the question is open, kind of, but what will you be managing? What will be the tasks that you have to manage, or what are all the objects and people and stuff that you have to manage inside of a game studio? Where here's a little list of things that it doesn't have to all be in one person, but often if it's a small team, it's just like 2-3 of you, then maybe one person will be actually managing all of these things. And that's so people, the team, because you have to inform them of what's the plan, how are we going to organize, you have to lead them, you have to control them. The game, because it's one kind of thing, maybe you're leading the team, but maybe you're also leading the game. So what's the vision for the game? Like, what are the tasks? What is the next milestone? How are we doing in terms of play testing? So a game also has its kind of plan and its process, which might be a little bit different from the company's plan, because there might be different projects in the company, so you have to align them as well. Managing budget. So do you have finances? Is it covered? For how long? By what time do you have to pay who in the studio? By what time do you have to pay some vendors? When is somebody else supposed to pay you? Maybe an investor or a publisher. Did they pay on time? If they don't pay on time, is that going to make a problem for you? Do you have enough kind of reserve to manage that? Then office hardware, software, licenses. Like, are you guys from home working? Are you in a co-working space? Do you have a rented office? What hardware do you need? Do you have licenses for all the software? Like, is that all cleared? Is that all updated? So it's kind of the inventory that you have. Then accounting and legal as well. Accounting in terms of like having all of the budgetary and financial things accounted for in the right way with an accounting service that you don't have to necessarily be a professional of, but you have maybe somebody who's doing it for you, being like an outsourced accounting service. Then legal, obviously I'm not a lawyer. Most people who work in video games are not lawyers themselves, but you should have a go-to kind of a lawyer that you can ask for things that you're not sure about, or who preps you when you start out the company. They prep you, let's say, template documents or agreements that you can use, like a template working agreement if you employ somebody, a template publishing agreement, a template like platform, or whatever the setup is, to have templates so that you don't have to, every time you want to employ somebody, that you have to go, oh yeah, I need a new employment contract, but you have a template who a legal office did, and you know that you can use it, and then it's up to date with kind of the legal status in your country or your environment. Then also you have to manage the brand of the company, of the game, maybe the community, a website, social media. So that's also something to be managed. The environment, we talked about the big environment around the organization. So maybe there's customers or players or clients or suppliers, vendors, publishers, investors, platforms. So there's a lot of potential kind of contacts you keep up with, maybe some public offices, maybe some grants, maybe some things that you apply to, like to, or now it's the EU Creative Funds is open until I think the 12th of April. So maybe you manage the application process. You got to, if it's your first time, you got to figure out, what do we even need to apply? Like, what documents do we need? Which of these documents do we have to get from public offices? Which of these documents do we have to create? Do we have them ready? Are they in the right format? Are they big enough, small enough? Do we have too much information? Because you don't want to overburden the judges with information that they didn't ask for. So maybe you have to manage all of that. Events, we mentioned Reboot, but there's other events in the region, and of course, kind of globally, Gamescom in Germany, or GDC happening now soon in the United States. So do you go to events? Do you go to conferences? Do you go just as a visitor or as an exhibitor? Is there a meeting system? Are you setting up 20 meetings pre-event? Are you going to have a booth? Do you have to bring some materials? Do you have to print materials? Do you have to organize the printing of the materials? And the game dev community, if you're involved in, let's say, the Slovenian association, their events, or any local association, or the Croatian association, or public office, or just drink ups and meetups? Are you going to present there something about the game? So there's a lot of things that are not related to the game that you potentially have room to manage and run inside of a game studio. And this was my attempt to have you show a brief overview of all the topics without going into how do we actually manage and what are the challenges and all the topics. What I wanted to tell you in terms of, like, I don't know if you're already working in a game dev studio in this capacity, or you plan to do it, but I wanted to give you an example or an overview from my experience what your day might look like when you're starting out and you're not doing it the best way, compared to how over time you can get better at running kind of your daily tasks. And here, from my experience, a bad way of doing things, or a bad way of having your day be filled, is with micromanaging, losing all time on administration, and not adding value to the team, the company, the game. So from my experience, it can happen that people, since this list is really big that we showed, that people get a little bit lost in all that admin. It gets easier over time because you also develop internal templates. You already get the experience from when the game is in a certain phase, that you know that you need to prep side documents of that phase because you'll be using it in a lot of these other activities. So with experience, you get a lot of less admin to do, and it can be a little bit overwhelming in the beginning. But if you see yourself kind of losing a lot of time or most of the time on admin, then it's a signal that you should try to kind of streamline that a little bit so that you can still add value to the team and the game. And also a bad sign, like, managers should never be micromanagers. So you shouldn't be kind of hovering over everybody in the studio and being like, oh, what are you doing? And did you do this right? And did you do that right? From my experience, it's better to go towards a way where you can trust the people who work on the team, because they have their roles for a reason. So if there's an artist in the studio, they should be a lot better at that than I am. So I shouldn't be a person checking on how they're doing it, because they should be kind of self-sufficient and skillful enough and artistic enough to do it, and that I trust that they'll do a great job. Likewise with any other role. So there can be control, there can be coaching, there can be that type of thing, but that's more on a more kind of, not on a daily micromanaging type of approach. And there should be trust that different people with their roles would do a great job with their role in the company. Also, if you're going from that bad work day, how it looks, towards a better one, you should have a balance of admin and productive work. So definitely adding value to the team and to the game by leading, and maybe you have some skills for the game development process that the other people in the team don't have. So you have to have that spare time in your day to add that value to the game as well, not just kind of run the admin things and the administrative and the managing thing, but also contributing as a developer in any capacity or any role to the game and the team as well. And then a great work day or work schedule will look like that you have minimal admin. It's mostly streamlined. Yes, you have all of the lists that's here on the right, but you have kind of templates and you know what you're doing, so you can kind of work out the admin really quickly and get rid of it. Or if you're bigger and have some funds, have somebody help you with it as well. And fully trust the team. So fully have really the trust build up in the team that people will do a lot better job at their job than you would ever, because you don't have the talent and the skills. So for me, my journey was definitely more micromanaging starting out, just from a personal insecurity type of way of, you want to check that everything is good and you're worried if it's going to be on time and if it's going to be good. But I'm now much more liberated in a sense that I trust my team kind of endlessly in what they do, and love to be amazed of the quality that they can bring to the table that I can't in the capacity of their roles. So we're kind of minimal admin and full trust to the team, and then have time to improve yourself, and which means kind of constantly see where you can add more value or where you can bring things to the table where your role is and where the other counterparts of the team are not focusing on. So you should be focusing on market and publishers and investors and potentially grants and admin and all of the list that we have. Where can you get better at that and doing it better and have a better kind of track record and kind of make more quality work and bring value? Time to anticipate the future here is kind of a weird thing. but it really is to follow the industry and what's happening, because of the environment, as we mentioned, is really complex. You should try to be on track, not with the whole industry, because that's, from my experience, it's impossible. If somebody wants to refute me, go ahead, but you should focus on the niche that you're doing. So if it's a certain type of game, if it's a certain type of platform, and you should focus on where you're potentially seeing the studio growing into. So you should focus on where you are right now, how you can contribute better to that niche, make that game better, and have a better opportunity on the market or with that audience. But also looking kind of at the 2-year, 3-year plan of where's the studio going to be, what are going to be our opportunities, do we have the skill set, how can we get to that skill set through the projects that we're going to do. So trying to think more ahead is definitely something that I think is having the time in the day to do the admin, to trust the team, to improve yourself and anticipate the future, is what is here summarized as Kaizen, which translated directly would be change, which is good, or good change, and then a little bit more loosely, kind of continuous improvement. So there's always this, as we have, and if you look at the planning process, the functions, it's always a loop. You plan something, you organize it, you lead, then you control, and based on the control, you change. And this should be, if you didn't cover it, you will, but I think you covered it last time. It's in game development, iteration. So this is the same, but you kind of iterate on yourself. You work on yourself to try to make all of those things better, and to be able to bring more value, more and more value, even like little bit better every month, a little bit better. But it's very, what's the word? It's very humbling to see yourself becoming better at something. So it can be a driver for you as well. Okay. The mindset, to talk about the mindset a little bit. So we talk about, you saw that there's a lot of potential things to manage. You saw that there's a complex environment, but we haven't talked yet about it. You're kind of...
Is there something else I can help with?
Oh, wait. My clock, my watch is talking to me. I think I activated Siri. Apologies. So we haven't talked yet. We haven't talked yet about your responsibility, maybe, of running the whole studio, and the feeling of the responsibility of being responsible for the people, or the project, or the budget, or the timeline. So that can be at first something that's big, and that looks a little bit intimidating. So to talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial mindset, or the people who are running the studio's mindset, is, I would say that you do need to have resilience, flexibility, and drive, because resilience is going to help you with all the situations that don't go the way you planned. Flexibility is going to help you that when those situations happen, you have the ability to pivot and change and adapt. And drive is always going to be stronger than your failures. So drive is always going to make you stand up again. So it's I think that the more Western American Silicon Valley startup attitude is really a little bit in that regard more advanced than our mindset here at the Balkans, or our region, the Adria region. I feel, from my experience in our environment, not in games, but generally our environment in which we live in, that business failure, or failure of any type in your work, isn't really looked upon as an opportunity to learn, but it's more like, oh yeah, you failed in business. Whereas I really come to believe that the approach of seeing failures as stepping stones to learn something, and then not do it better next time, is really the better mindset. Because you will fail. It's making games is really complex, and there's a lot of things that you can do wrong, and where you can step in the bucket, so to say, to do it wrong. So you will fail, and you'll need to be able to keep going. So resilience, flexibility, and drive will help you with that. And I truly believe that every failure is a learning opportunity and a signal that you're one step closer to success. And if you can loosen up a little bit on yourself, don't be too harsh on yourself, and to accept this type of approach, I think you have an easier way of, because what I like to say is, problems will be there and tough situations will be there. You can either approach them not having them be a burden to you, or having them be a burden to you, because the situation will happen anyhow. And it's on you how you want to approach it, and whether you want it kind of to have a more light approach towards them, and solve them without compromising kind of your own, without them putting any weight on you. In terms of vision, definitely people running studios might, so it depends if it's a small team or if it's a big team, but there has to be a vision for the game, for the team, for the company, the culture inside. And sometimes you don't have to have a vision for all of this, because you'll have a team that maybe somebody else will do the vision for the next game, or somebody will have a vision for your culture. But these are things that need to have a vision. So the game, the team, the company, the culture, they need to have a vision, and those visions need to align and be coherent for things not to fall apart, for things to be kind of aligned and going in a certain direction. In terms of motivation, I would tell you to try and know and understand your motivation, like why you're making games, what is your drive, what is the thing that kept you kind of become interested and be here today, what's the thing that keeps pushing you, to know your why. There is this a movement of saying, like, you have to know your why before you know your how and your what. So knowing your motivation, why you want to do something, is important, because if you know what your motivation is, what your driver is, then it's easier to care about it. It's easier to be mindful of it and to use it as a signal of whether you're going in the right direction and it's something you believe in, or if it's not. And sometimes an example I like to give is when people or like journalists or friends or players ask somebody running a studio, like, how come you chose to focus on this niche or this genre or this? And here it's I would say a misconception that decision is always like a conscious decision by the guys or the girls running the studio, because it doesn't have to be. Sometimes you only have a couple of options. Like if you have a certain team with a certain skill set and a certain track record, and maybe currently you only have two opportunities or one opportunity. There's this one grant and there's this one publisher. So it's not so much about, yes, we made a choice, we made down that direction to go down that direction, but it was, if we want to stay as a team and if we want to keep on working, we have to make that choice. So I just wanted to make you a little bit aware of that. It's not always just 100%, yeah, now I woke up with this vision, a dream, and now I'm pushing this dream. But it's more of a mixture of a compromise of where you want to go, but what the opportunities are. So what is the environment compared to what you can bring to the table? And then there's kind of a mix between those two. But knowing and caring about your motivation will help you navigate that, kind of being a compass for you, and what is the direction you want to go to stay motivated, because failures will happen, hard times will be there, but if you're still going into a direction where you can have your motivation and care about, it's going to be a lot easier to step up again and bring yourself, kind of dust yourself off and move away from that failure and learn and keep going. Risk. There is definitely risk in entrepreneurial kind of things that you do in entrepreneurship, and it's normal. It shouldn't scare you. If it scares you, share it. So talk to the people in the team, talk to them about what you feel is a risk, talk to them about the scenarios, like what if this happens or what if that happens. You can do risk assessment, where you say, okay, what is the probability of this happening? And what is the impact of that happening? So if it's a low probability and low impact, you maybe don't even have to deal with it, because it might not happen. It's probably not going to happen. And even if it happens, it's not going to matter. So you don't have to think about it. But if you find something that, oh, there's a high probability this might happen and the impact is pretty big, then you can do kind of preventive measures. You can say, okay, what can we do as a team to kind of try for that not to happen? And if it happens, to have a smaller impact, not be so great. So sharing risk, managing risk will help if there's anxiety being built up, where you feel like there's a lot of risk involved and you're not sure whether to go down that direction. And uncertainty as a point here. Well, uncertainty, I mean, should be something that excites you, I guess. Nobody likes to fail, but uncertainty is also a little bit exciting. So you don't know what's going to happen, but you're in it with your heart, with your drive, with your passion. You're building products that you love, games that you love. You're hopefully in a field that you enjoy or love. So the uncertainty should be an exciting uncertainty, not a crippling uncertainty in how you perceive what's in front of you. And often people, you have like two spectrums of people. One will say, oh, you were lucky, and the other ones will say luck is when opportunity meets preparation, or I make my own luck. So some people will look at a situation as, oh, you didn't really contribute to it a lot, it just fell into your hands. But you can have the attitude of, no, I was working on it really hard to try to get my chances for it to happen be bigger. And then when it happened, I was ready and prepared with all of my kind of preparation and quality and game and vision and everything, so that you can build your own luck. So if we conclude the entrepreneurial mindset, I would say you have to be resilient, flexible, you have to have your drive, take care of a vision, take care of your motivation. There's going to be risk, but that should be exciting. Okay, let's look. Okay, yeah, we got to also cover the art of the pitch. So the art of the pitch, how to convince, persuade, present your idea. If I can sum it up in just 2 points from my experience, it's you need to stand out and you need to have market fit. And standing out, you can stand out in different ways. So it can be visuals, it can be the mechanics, it can be how the vision for the game, it can be the team, the story behind the team can be kind of make it stand out. So standing out is really important, not so much in which way. It should be a positive way, but it's important that you stand out. And market fit will really help. So if you have something where the publisher or investor will think, oh yeah, there is an audience and a market for it, and you're bringing them what they want, that's an opportunity. So those are the two things that are easy to say, but they're not so easy to do. If we talk more about a kind of an approach of what you can do, then there's one of the approaches is 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 bullet font size. And if you Google a little bit, you're going to find dozens and dozens of recommended pitch formats for video game pitches. You can find it by agencies, by consultants, by individual publishers, how they would like to get pitched. You can find it so there's a lot of resources. They mostly converge to the same conclusions, but sometimes they have a little bit of differences. But usually it's these 10 things that are here on the slide. I won't read all over them because you can do that on your own. But what I want us to do is to take a look at some pitches. So let me just try to open this and see if we can take a look at some pitches to kind of, because that in the slide you'll have the info that you can read, but here maybe we can comment, or I can comment for you some of the things that you won't be able to read there. So let's look at The Flame and the Flood. You can see, so there's a title, there's immediately, you can see a certain graphic design or artistic vision for it. So it's about what it is and what you do in it. And then you're already confronted with some visuals from, so here they wanted us to understand that there's been a flood and there's islands, and then maybe you're on this location and there's stuff to do on that location. So it's communicating not just by the content of the text and the copy, but it already communicated a graphic style or a visual graphic approach. It communicated a location, some activities that we're going to have to do. And then it went into now we're here and this is the location, this is the art style that we use. And then this is the character kind of development from a visual perspective, or maybe we already get a little bit of a story from the character. Another character, looks like a sidekick, so that's really super cool to have like a dog also be your friend and try to flee from the flood. Some more art. This nice kind of colors, a great image. And then here we have, so these are not in-game visuals, at least they don't look like they are. And then this looks like an in-game visual which communicates the look and feel. So what's the atmosphere we see here? Maybe it's early morning or evening and it's dusky and there's a flood. I have a little fire on my raft. So it communicates the look and feel of what the game is going to be. Again, the look and feel at a different time of day or weather. And then we have some situations here explained. I don't understand this slide, but then it kind of concludes. Maybe this was the vision for the graphic design in terms of using that maybe a little bit old school or a little bit this kind of graphic art style for their visuals. And they conclude with a little bit about the team and probably a contact. Let's look at another pitch. Let's see. let's look at another pitch. Here we have maybe this one. Let it load. Okay, so here we get an introduction, a little bit of a message, and what the summary is of the document. Again, you can see from the first slide, you're hit with graphic design. So it's not like your standard fonts and standard inside of it, but you have a visual, a graphic design, a logo. So you're kind of already hit with a little bit of the look and feel, how it's supposed to feel. You get the title, you get the environment, so that we get kind of where is it going to be placed. Then it tells us very shortly what it's about, like what's the genre, what's the type of, what can we expect from the game. And then it goes into more views from the game. So we can see the bear, we can see an environment. We now see the art style. You can see that this was more like an illustration or a concept art, where this looks like an in-game screenshot. And then they, again, like we saw in the last one or in the recommendations, go into the look and feel and the moody situations. Here we have some character text. Here we have some explanation about it, the stage of development, the different aspects of the gameplay, the concept. Again, another illustration which conveys the look and feel. References, other games. So that would be, is there an audience? How do we fit in with the audience? The player experience, this, we haven't seen this in the last pitch, but here it also has like the UX. What do they see as the most common actions that are going to be done in the game? And this even looks like a roadmap. So stages of in the roadmap, when are they going to be at which milestone? What has been explored and what needs to be explored in terms of, so they haven't designed it yet. They want to still see how to design this. And here is a budget breakdown. Obviously, since this is public, they didn't put the concrete numbers, but there's a budget breakdown as well. Okay, so you can see some already things in those two that happened, that we could see like that repeated in both of those pitches. And if we go back to the slide that we show, that we have, where it says it should start simple, show the logo of your company, show the publisher the basics, outline the genre, the platform, the target audience, talk about your unique selling points, talk a little bit about the story, background overview. We didn't here see a trailer or a gameplay video, but usually publishers will really like to see a demo or a video, something that which isn't just static, because games are interactive. So a video is already better, but a demo or a playable thing is even better. Concept art and screenshots, schedule and budget, company profile, experience of team leads, and some contact information. So you could see both of these in both of those examples. And at the end of the slides, I'll have some more examples, so that on your own time you can look at some more pitches and see how they approached the pitching. But all in all, standing out and having market fit is pretty good. And then communicating your look and feel and all of these details that you can look into on the slide for the pitch. Legal frame. This is not exciting, but we should spend a little time on it, just that you kind of know what are all the potential questions that a studio should have covered. In terms of IP-related rights, so you should know that when you do something creatively, write something, code something, somebody drew something. So there's a lot of categories of what goes into what is a copyright or what has IP rights on it, intellectual property rights. But some of the attributes of it, that there's authorship. So who is the author? That's also called the moral right. In Europe, you cannot sell your moral right. So if I am the author of something, I will always be the author of something. On the UK, in the US legal system, in the United States, you can sell the authorship, so the moral right. So I can write something, but I can sell that right to you and never be able to say that I'm the author of it, because I sold that right to you. That's the moral author right. And it's in different regions of the world, you can either sell it or you can't sell it. It's yours forever. So you have the authorship, then you have the ownership. So I can be the author, but somebody else can have the ownership of it. I sold the right to kind of commercially distribute and do other things with that IP, intellectual property, to another person, although I'm an author. And the authorship usually lets you kind of manipulate or trade or negotiate about the distribution rights, exclusivity or non-exclusivity rights, licenses, sub-licenses, And usually licenses, sub-licenses, exclusivity, and distribution can be negotiated on in agreements on a certain territory, where you can say, I give you a license for my IP just for Croatia and Slovenia, or I give you a license for my IP just for the United States, or for the United States and China, or for Germany. So you can sub-license it, or you can license it to a certain territory, to a certain duration, and to a certain platform. So I can say to a publisher, okay, you have the IP rights, the distribution rights for my title for USA, Germany, and France, just for Steam over a period of 3 years. And then after 3 years, it comes back to me, it goes back to me, and I will have somebody else have the rights for China or Turkey, because I think that they have a better knowledge of that market than you do. So those are the things that you can amend and change and variable in different agreements. It's the exclusivity, distribution, territory, duration, and platforms. Usually in those agreements, you will try to talk about the commercial terms. So what are the terms of it? Is there a minimum guarantee? A minimum guarantee is usually like an advance. So a publisher might give you an advance, say you need, let's say you need 100K for the production. So they say, we will give you the minimum guarantee of 100K. They give you 100K for the production. This is the amount that's going to have to be recouped. So they're first going to have to get that amount back before then you go to a revenue share. And the recoup again can have different revenue shares. So until you haven't recouped, until you haven't returned the publisher's minimum guarantee, you might have more of the revenue might go to the publisher and less to the developer, while after being recouped, then more might go to the developer and less to the publisher. And then maybe you also have a duration. So you say after 3 years, the publisher doesn't get anything anymore. Or so it depends on what type of agreement you were able to negotiate. And there's some standards, but the standards depend on regions, on platforms, and what type of publishers they are. So, but usually in modern times, you don't want to give up your IP. If you're the author, you want to keep being the author, keep being the owner of the distribution rights, that you control who gets it, the licenses. Normally, you see a recoup because whoever invested is expected to first kind of get their investment back, and then you're sharing profits. So that's there. Usually, you would see a recoup. Usually, the developer would keep the IP, and usually the developer would need a minimum guarantee, which is kind of funding them to develop it. So beside IP-related rights, there are also work-related rights. And here I'm not an expert on the international level. What I know from Croatia is that there are different types of work relationships. So I can employ somebody, but I can also have them have a contract with the company where they're an author or they do a work for the company, but they're not employed. The difference is that employment gives some more securities to the worker. Employment can be over a long period of time, so without kind of any schedule, but we say you're employed indefinitely. Employment is also not tied in Croatia to a delivery of some work. Employment means you're employed to work, but it doesn't say how much you need to. There are no quotas. So you should work, and then inside of the employment you'll see what it will be that you're working on, and what it will be you're delivering. While the external agreements with an author or a piece of work, actually they say what you need to deliver in order to be paid. So it's kind of different approaches and different legal frames for different work-related rights. And then you have to know also that there's different levels of benefits for different worker agreements. So the employment would have the biggest benefits needing to be paid towards government, while the author agreement or the work agreement, not employment, would have a little bit of smaller percentage of benefits, at least in Croatia, being paid. But I haven't employed anybody ever in different countries, so I don't know the legal systems for other countries. Here, it's more important that you just see an overview of that we have IP-related rights and work-related rights, and that you should find a lawyer to give you some templates and advise you on how to solve these things in a template approach so that you can reuse it and streamline it. Okay, and in work-related rights, so usually if you have an employment, by Croatian law, if you employ somebody, they are transferring their IP rights to the company. That's by Croatian law, but you can change it. You can say, no, they don't have to transfer all of the rights. They're transferring this and this, so it can be agreed upon. It can be a partial transfer or full transfer. Usually with the agreement on authorship, they don't have to transfer the authorship, but they would transfer some of the commercial rights, because it's important for a company to be able to negotiate with third parties, with publishers, with whoever. And publishers and investors, they don't want to work with a company if it does not have the commercial rights, because then it can't really negotiate on behalf of the project. They would need to first talk with all the authors inside of the company or who worked on the project. Do they all agree for these and these terms? So usually a company will solve that internally before they talk to anybody externally. So there will be agreements inside of the company that the company can negotiate about IP rights, commercial rights, distribution rights, whatever. That should be solved at a company level pre-talking to external, the environment. And in terms of service, usually small teams don't really need custom EULAs or terms of service. Platforms usually include those, like Steam and stuff. So there's already some terms of service there that the players take over. But if you need them, again, the advice would be to contact somebody who is a lawyer, who is a professional in the legal industry to help you with that. Okay, and we're slowly getting to the end. Where to find funding? A couple of different approaches to funding. So you can go independently. You can bootstrap in your free time, or work on other things, like we used to kind of have jobs in different industries, and then your free time do that. Or some people start out with work for hire projects in game dev, working or helping other studios, getting some profits there, and then using those profits to work on their own projects. Or newly now you have co-productions, where you can team up with other studios to co-produce something. Soon in Croatia will have applications for, it's called the European co-production market for games, where studios from a lot of European countries will apply, and then they'll have some activities, some workshops where they try to find potential co-productions where maybe you can get part of your funding in one country and they can get a part of the funding in another country. So nobody had to find 100% of the funding, but you found a little bit, they found a little bit, and you co-produce. So it's possible that you kind of do it together in that type of way. Then you have independent, then you could have equity-based investments or funding, which are usually angel investors, venture capital, or other capital funds. Equity investment would mean that if you have shares in the company, that you give up certain shares in the company, they become a small shareholder in the company in an exchange for some capital that you can use to build a product. And there are some angel investors and venture capital companies in the region, but I didn't go here into detail. I'm more talking to you about the different models of funding. So you can be either independent, look for equity-based investment. Then there's debt funding. Debt funding will be through either the FFF, so friends, fools, and family. So you can ask your friends and family, or find some fools who would be happy to loan you the money to work on some projects. If you're okay with that, that your aunt loses her savings on your indie game dev adventure if it doesn't go well. Or you can look for bank loans, but usually if you're just starting out, banks will not be very excited to give you money because you don't have like a steady revenue stream or clients. So you look more like a liability than a stable kind of cash producing entity that can pay out interest payments. That's where venture capital is more open. Equity-based investments are more open to taking the risk and getting in return some shares of the company. And then there's project-based funding, you don't go into debt. Nobody takes your equity, but incubators and publishers sometimes helps with this. So incubators can give you grants, or publishers give you minimum guarantees where you can cover the production cycle, and then later they get more out of the revenue share until they recoup. So they didn't enter your company and they didn't get the ownership, and you're not in debt, but they took over the risk of funding the project. So so the types of funding would be independent, equity-based, debt, project-based. But you will have in week 13 a fundraising lecture, so there will be more details on this. What I wanted to still say on the topic was that where can you find funding in Croatia, since I know our ecosystem pretty well. The Ministry of Culture has annual support funds, and soon we'll have a program funds in 2023 that are quite big. I think 50 million for developing audiovisual works, in which games are included, 50 million euros. The Croatian Audiovisual Center has an annual now fund to fund a grant to fund development and production. We have something that is called self-employment kind of grants from our employment agency. Then an incubator, a peaceful incubator, also helps you with the self-employment, but also with a little bit of additional funds from the city and the county. There's regional incubators, and there's angel investors who usually you can find at industry events. So in Croatia, we've seen this development of there now being quite a couple. These are all Croatian. So you still have the option of kind of regional funds or EU funds or global, but these are Croatian sources of potential funding. Okay, this is fine. What did I want to say with this? I wanted to say that, as announced, things will go wrong in running a company, in running any company, not just a game dev company, but things will definitely go wrong in running a game dev company. And things can go wrong in different fields. So with people, because we're all people with different emotions, skill sets, there's deadlines. Sometimes we have conflicts. There can be things that go wrong with planning. We can miss deadlines. We maybe forgot in our planning some important things, so the plan has to change. Things can go wrong with risks, so unforeseen events can happen. We can underestimate some things and think that this will be really easy, but then it turns out to be really hard. They can be budgetary things can go wrong. Delays on payments, you're expected to be paid, but they didn't pay, and you got to pay. An example in Croatia is you have to pay payroll by the 15th of the month with all the benefits, because that's the only legal frame that you can do it in. So if you didn't come up with the funds till the 15th and can't pay out payroll, then it's a pretty kind of big offense. So if delays in inbound payments can make some trouble budget wise. Filling gaps can go wrong. People sometimes plan only for the production of the game, and then they release the game and they didn't plan what's going to happen in the first 2 or 3 months after the release, because the cycle of payment from platforms is not 15 days. It's sometimes more than 2 months. So you have to kind of be able to cover the gap if the game is making money after release for the studio. Under budgeting, if you happen to under budget, then that can go wrong. There can go things wrong with the game. Maybe the feedback is not as good as you expected. The playtesting is going so good, you need more time to work on it. Maybe you couldn't generate the interest that you planned for in a certain community or social media. Maybe you received some bad reviews. So how are you going to approach that? You weren't hoping for that. It's going to affect your kind of image and your branding and how you're going to market, push the game. Sales can go wrong. And you should know that 95% of projects, game dev projects, don't break even. So a lot of things will fail, and it's fine. It's fine. A wish list will go wrong. You will count on your wish list on Steam and how many conversions you'll have, but then you'll get less, and then that will go wrong. And work for hire might go wrong. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but we already kind of covered the resilience and flexibility and drive. So you will fail. That's normal. Just learn from it and then stand up and go on and repeat the process. You'll be fine. We all failed a lot of times, and we're still here as an accomplishment of still kind of getting up and doing it again. And yeah, we're now at the slide where it repeats what we had to learn today, because I'm hoping that I managed to bring across a little bit of those topics and a little bit of the thoughts and experience about starting and managing a studio. So I hope you learned a little bit about how to create your studio and how to build a team that will have the same mindset, vision, and motivation, and how to prepare your pitch for publishers and investors. This is a little just kind of slide that reminds you of all the topics we talked about. And it's good to, if you want to remind yourself of the whole lecture, what we did, just if you know what each image represents, then you'll be pretty good in like all the topics that we talked about. And there's also a little bit of homework for you to do. It's to create 3 core pillars of your game studio, to envision a culture for your game studio, to create a list of team members that you will need for that game studio or that game. And here, don't only think about their skills and experience, but also their cultural preferences. Think also what you can outsource in terms of the resources and the team. Make estimates on how much funding you will need, and propose 3 funding sources to start your game studio. So these are the 5 topics or the 5 points for the homework, and you can send it as last time to the email that's shared here. And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, you're also getting a little bit of additional resources on all of the topics we talked today that you can research more in depth in your free time if you're interested to go more in depth in those topics. They will help you. There's a lot of resources on it out there. This is a selection of a few that I thought were really good and really beneficial. And that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Andrej. This was a lovely presentation. Like, you really went through all of the key stuff. And yeah, I think now we'll just jump right into the questions and answers, like in Q&A section. I think we have like 2 of them. Yeah, you can just read them out loud, and I'm going to show them at the bottom.
Can you, as an owner of a Croatian company, pay out your income throughout dividends with 0% tax? I think so. If I am not mistaken, dividends are something. There's 2 different types how you can register a company in Croatia. It's CGDA, which is limited liability company, or like a shareholding company. So it's a different registration type. And as far as I know, dividends can only be paid out by the shareholding companies, while we are registered as an LLC, and my experience is only with an LLC. So I wouldn't be able to advise you on the other type of company structuring and whether they have some better taxation opportunities. Maybe, yeah, I hope that answers the question. If not, give me more details and I'll take a look at it. Yeah, we can look at the second question. Let's say you're working on games after work and have to assign shares of royalties profits. Any tips on how to assign value to types of amounts of work done without alienating team members? There were a couple, if I'm not mistaken, GDC talks about this, and there was a company, I think there was a gaming company who worked on a game called Armello. Armello is like a strategy game with cute animals, 3D animals on like a big board where they fight over things. And I think that I don't remember the name of the game studio. They had a GDC talk, and I think it was live on their website, about how they tried to build up a system with points where different work would be regarded as different points, and then it would lead to how to come up with the shares of the company if at one point it will have profits. Then there's another example. We have a Croatian studio, GameChuck, who has an approach of everybody in the studio has the same payroll. And everybody in the studio has the same decision-making kind of heaviness. So whenever they make a decision, everybody in the studio gets the same vote, the same share, and all of the profits that ever are going to be made are going to be shared equally. So my advice here for this question is, it doesn't matter how you structure it. It's just that the team needs to agree on it and be aligned on it. So you can structure it any way you want. You can say, okay, we're going to do it the same as this studio does. Or you can talk about like, hey guys, what do you think would be a fair approach? I think it's important just that the people are clear on it, and that they didn't have, how do you say, like their fingers crossed behind their back. So because that are then conflict points that can arise later on. So it's really important that people align on this and agree on this, because in the long term, it shouldn't start to become a problem. Okay, let's try to look at the next question. If we have more. What was the hardest crisis at your studio? That's a good question. I mean, there were some situations where you're like, you just want to cry. I don't remember crying, but I felt like crying. I think one of the worst situations or crisis was when, for one of our titles, Last Encounter, you can look it up on Steam. So we did the best preparation for the market than we ever did. Like, we did reviews early before the game was live with journalists to get their insight and to anticipate how are they going to review the game. We had professional PR agencies from core markets that have good track records and kind of helping us push the game launch. We had good results on the wish list on Steam. We had set up content creator marketing with kind of sending out thousands of keys to content creators. So we had the best planned and prepared launch ever, and we had the worst sales and the worst reviews ever on that game. I think one reviewer gave us like a 4 out of 10, which just felt like, come on, like, is it really that bad? So it's a situation where you never would have expected it. Like with a game that we did previously, which was, in our opinion, like, it wasn't at that level and it wasn't that well prepared. It had much better results and much better reception compared to this one. So it's really, you never know. But luckily we were able, to not lose any people over it and to keep working and to transfer to and shift to some different stuff. So yeah, I mean, bad things, shit will happen. Shit will hit the fan, and for me, I'm starting to look more and more at just, being still active as the same company with the same people as a big success already on its own. Okay, let's jump into the next question if we have more. What are best practices for effective meetings? From my experience, have an agenda. So have points you want to talk about at the meeting. Share those points with everybody who's going to be in the meeting before the meeting, a lot before the meeting, so they can prepare, so they know what's going to be talked about, and have a time frame for the meeting and stick to it. I, for one, if a meeting goes for over 1 hour, I have a feeling like are we brainstorming? Like, what are we figuring out what the meeting is supposed to be about? So if you know what the meeting should be about, have the topics, have the people who are relevant to talk about them, and have a time frame. And when you know what you want to talk about it, and then stop it. And if things come up which are important questions but should not be solved on the meetings, just move them aside. Say, okay, this is important. We'll note it down, and we'll have the people responsible for that question talk about it at a separate meeting. Don't make people lose time over things that they shouldn't be sitting at, because it just builds frustration instead of them working on things where they can actually add value. So it just makes people lose time, and then they start not liking meetings. So make them as efficient as you can. Don't have meetings if you don't need to have them. That's my personal kind of experience and a best practice for effective meetings. And don't let them run for too long. People are not focused enough. Next question. Is it possible admin management work is split between all team members equally, so everyone takes care of a specific aspect as well as their own? Sure. I mean, why not? If they can do it. I mean, social media, for one, most people are on social media. So maybe somebody who's an artist and is prepping visuals already can have a pipeline where he's just prepping visuals for social media with posts as well. So it's really up to you. There is no go-to plan how to do it. And if admin is something where the whole team feels like nobody likes to do it, then it's only fair that everybody gets to do a chunk of it. What I do think you should still try to do is have it being in the skill set of the person who's doing it. So, because forcing somebody to do something that they don't like and feel like they don't have the skill set for is not going to have good results. But you need to have enough trust that nobody's going to misuse that. So that nobody's going to be like, oh yeah, I'm so bad at this, but they're not really bad. They're just trying to avoid the admin work. Okay, next question. Thanks for the great presentation. Why do you make games? Oh, well, I was really, after my 10 years at, thank you first for the compliment. I hope I brought value to you guys tonight. So I was for 10 years in television, and that was terrible. I burned out. I hated it. And I was at a crossroad that I had to choose, like, what do I want to do? I don't want to do this anymore after 10 years. And there was this feeling of like, when I was a kid, I always loved games. I always played a lot of games. I always had friends over for like the whole weekend, playing throughout the night, whatever came out, on the PlayStation, on PC, downloading games, installing games over discs, I don't know. There was a fascination with the technical aspect, but they also brought me some value and some like personal, intimate things that TV or movies didn't do that strongly. So games were just an interactive, magical box. And I think I'm very blessed to be working in a field that brought me a lot of kind of those positive emotions. Next question. As failure is regular and normal side of entrepreneurship, Andre, what would you say was the failure from which you learned grew the most? There were a lot. One of the things I think I learned a lot about was, so we built Exordium more as a company than as a game and as a team, which meant that we brought together people who weren't friends. We brought together people who we thought are going to be really good at their positions. So the dynamics changed for me, because I was working before that, I worked with a friend on our own project where we had, bonds as friends, and we understood each other from the value perspectives. And now bringing a team together where their skill sets are great, but they might not be aligned in terms of like, they're not friends in that way. It took a while kind of to learn that my position wasn't supposed to be their friend, but it was supposed to be their leader and their manager. And for a while I was kind of being hard on myself in terms of, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? But I think I learned through it to kind of be better at that. I don't have to be friends with somebody in the team, but we can still do better work together than I would be able to do with a friend. So I changed my perspective on that. I don't know if it's the biggest thing I learned, but it just came to me now when Tom asked. Thank you for the question. Next question. How would you reconcile making educational games with aiming for a specific market target audience trend? I mean, making educational games is a specific market target audience and trend. So I'm not sure, maybe I misunderstood the question, but educational games, I mean, there's one thing I know from loving game design is there's an evolution, I think, of a designer where you start out from your own motivation, like the game you want to make, and then later on, the more experience you have, the more games you make, the less it's important, the less it becomes about you, the more it becomes about the target audience. So you can get a kick out of, how can I build a better game for that audience? How can I make an educational game that's more engaging? How can I make an educational game where it's fun to learn? You can find new motives and new motivation and new drive. So I don't think that you have to reconcile it. I think if you don't have passion for a certain market, target audience, trend, you should be careful about going into that direction, or take it as an exercise. That was a great exercise at an academy where it said, try to think about and design a game that you don't like a genre you don't like, or a game you would never play. It's a good exercise because it puts you in the shoes of that consumer, and you have to think about that player. Why did they like it? What do they like it about it? So it's a great exercise of seeing it from a different perspective. I hope I answered your question. I hope I understood it well. Next question. If I am developing a game with a friend, does it make sense to officially found a game studio? Where are the advantages? So it makes sense if you're ready for it. So if you're ready to take on the admin, if you're ready in the terms where the game is at, that you can pitch to publishers or investors, so that because they will want you to be a legally formed game studio, because they can't invest in a private person. So it depends on where you are. There will definitely be advantages, but there will also be disadvantages. A good point to do it is the point where you have enough made that you're able to talk to investors and publishers. And when is that? That's usually at the MVP, demo, prototype. So that's the situation where if you even find interest from a publisher, you're going to have to be an entity to get more funding. Even now with Croatian like state grants, you have to be an entity to get it. So if you want to really do it in a way that we're ready, we think we have what we take to look for funding, then that might be a good point to choose it. But I can't give you legal advice on like what's the best choice in your life. You have to choose if you want to take on the responsibility of running that. You have to feel like that you want to take on that risk. Okay, next question. If your team is working in their spare time and without pay, how do you keep your teammates accountable to deadlines? That's a hard question. So if you don't have compensation for what they're working on, then it's hard to say that you have deadlines, because a deadline is a product of knowing how much capacity you have available. And in a work relationship, that work capacity is guaranteed because the person is getting payment for it. So they can run their life and organize their life based on those payments. They know it's going to come, so they can work and they can organize their life. It's hard, as I said, life is complicated. So if somebody has some issues at work, personal issues, doesn't have the time, energy to spend on it, then maybe you shouldn't be setting up deadlines. So I would rather be talking about not how you can get them to meet the deadlines. I would rather be talking about how can you keep those people motivated to keep doing great work, and think about changing the deadlines, if that's another perspective for you. Next question, please. Just a sip of water. Is it okay to release a mediocre first game, or will that ruin your studio reputation going forward? It won't ruin the reputation. Experience is always better than no experience. What I would rather say is, if you feel or know that it's mediocre, don't release it. So you should feel like it's really good, and then if the results are mediocre, that's a different thing, because good games can have mediocre results. The quality of games is not reflected in their market results. Games have quality and they have market results. It's not always a correlation. We like to think that it is, but it doesn't have to be. But it will not ruin. A track record is always good. It's better to have 3 failed games than no games, because it means you're closer to success. Okay, next question. What is the biggest value that a studio manager brings to the team? We can't say biggest, because the list was pretty big on all the things that you can bring. One of the value is he can shield the team from things that don't matter to them in a creative sense. So if I have some things that it's complicated, I have to do some admin, there's some unforeseen situations, but it doesn't really affect them, then I can shield them and not even share it. So they don't have to waste their capacity and their energy on questions which are boring. That's maybe one. Maybe it's not the best value, but it's one of the values. Next question, please. How developed should a product be before applying for a grant? Is a detailed plan design document enough, or should it include some demo or proof that the project will be successfully completed? So there's no one answer to this, because every grant or every funding scheme is different. You will have to read their application process to understand what they need. There are some of them who are happy with just a paper pitch, so just nothing interactive, no video, no demo. Most of the time, publishers, investors, and so on will want to see something that's interactive and playable. The exception might be if you have track record in that genre. So if I already made this type of game, I made 3 of those and they were successful, then I don't have to prove a 4th time that I know how to do it. But if I'm changing genres, if I'm changing platforms, if I'm changing audiences, then I don't have a track record for it. So it might be better to have something that's... so most often I've seen from publishers, investors, they want to see something playable. Next question, please. We don't have any more questions.
Yeah, I think you shotgun through all of them. It was quite nice. Yeah, and there's also a lot of thank you. I mean, for the presentation, and a lot of people really enjoyed the answers. And I think we can give a virtual applause to it was a really great presentation and great insight and great answers.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy if I brought any value to you guys. So I hope that you had the opportunity to kind of also now bring some value in your circles.
Yeah. And I think with this, we're gonna slowly conclude this presentation. Just some final reminders for the next week. Next week we have Matej Jenko, which will have a game design. I think it's gonna be an amazing presentation again. And as before Andrej mentioned, don't forget to submit your homework until Saturday on the email that we posted, and there will also again how to say instructions and all of the things is going to be on Discord. So if you're not yet sign up for a Discord, you can also go to Slovenia Games.com, Game Production Masterclass, and sign up for newsletter or for our social medias. Everything, all the links are down in the description. I think that's it. Thank you guys for coming. It was amazing talk. Thank you, Andrej, again for sharing and motivational talk and all of it's really cool. I'm still wrapping my mind around. And yeah, thank you again.
My pleasure.